Thank you.
So, part two, let's start it out with something that people love to talk about, and that is there such a thing as media bias?
God. No.
We've got to deal with it.
No. Next question.
There's no
Actually,
bias.
there have been studies, and of course I can't quote them by name, but I swear I'm not making this up, that when they look at coverage of a particular event, they find that most media coverage skews slightly to the right. Slightly, like here's the middle.
We're talking politically now?
Politically, that's what I'm talking about in particular, that it goes just close to, it's more in the middle than people want to believe. What people, when they're talking about media bias and the multiple emails and nasty comments I used to get when I wrote for The Current, but I was a columnist, so I was paid to be biased. And I think people judged all of the work, when in fact, if they looked at the entire Hartford Current, they wouldn't find quite as much bias.
So let's stop. You're right, because I mean, if you see, I was under a different impression, as you probably thought. I mean, if you were to take the next 20 men and women that walk down the street and said, "Is there a media bias?" They'd say yes. Do you think it's right or left? They'd say left.
Yeah.
But let's talk about that just for a second, because we can educate some people by telling them the difference in journalism between an editorial writer, a columnist, and a reporter.
Thank you. I would love to.
Go right
Ladies
ahead.
and gentlemen, here's the difference. When you're looking at news coverage, that absolutely should be unbiased. That should be just the facts, ma'am or sir. Then you have column writers who are hired gas bags, who are paid to have an opinion. And I used to get letters and emails saying, "You're so opinionated." Thank you, I am. I'm paid for that. Then you get editorials, which are, they're not written by committee, but they're basically, a committee decides this is the stance the newspaper's going to take, and an editorial writer will write that editorial based on what the editorial board or the editorial employees will decide.
Okay.
And those are biased,
Okay.
but they're informed bias. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah, but I think where it becomes kind of mushy is that when people hopefully constructively criticize a newspaper, let's take, or any kind of journalism, there is supposed to be, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Sue, there's supposed to be a hard line between the editorial representations of the newspaper and the journalists. And I think clarifying the columnist is there to give opinions, fine.
Exactly.
But in the newsroom, the bias that the columnist may bring, or the editorial board clearly must bring, is supposed to not get down into the journalists, right?
I agree, yes.
But it does.
I think it does because people are human, but I also think that if the best compliment a newspaper can get is that it angers everybody on all sides of the political spectrum. That people who have conservative politics get angry because the newspaper is too liberal, and people with liberal politics believe that the newspaper doesn't go far enough or is too conservative. I can't really speak to particular reporters, but I promise that there are too many studies out there that say not quite as bad as you think. Yep. Independent studies, not just people sitting around the newsroom saying we're pretty good.
You can tell by that expression in my
Yeah, you
face,
didn't look
so
like
I
you
gave it away.
I don't blame you.
Let's talk about this a little bit more.
Okay, you don't believe me.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Not because I don't believe that you have read independent studies, but I guess my bias. I mean, if you said to me, if you shot right back at me and you said, "Jim, how do you know?" I would shoot back at you and say, "Sue, because I look. And I read, and I watch, and I listen."
Are you comfortable saying what your political bent is?
Yeah, my political bent is fiscally extraordinarily conservative.
I gotta go. You're wrong. No, go ahead. It's not that kind of show, is it?
But I would say socially moderate to a little bit liberal.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm one of those guys that kind of like leans right when it comes to business and finance,
Sure.
but leans middle and left a little bit when it comes to some social issues.
And that's actually pretty much how many of the voters in Connecticut are. They're fiscally much more conservative than you would think.
Oh, so
You're to the right of them?
You and I ought to go on a debating place together.
I will
Cindy.
win. I will. No, I'm
Well,
just kidding.
I love a
did.
confident woman, but I mean, listen, the reality of it is,
Yeah.
if you were over here and I was over here, let me give you some examples. At the national level, I mean, what we have is we have the different media that we were talking about before. You got CBS, NBC, and ABC,
Right.
right? And then you have all cable news. And in cable news, I mean, you may have MSNBC over here and you got Fox over here. If you come all the way down to the local level, I give you the Hartford Courant versus the Waterbury Republican. I've read both. I read both papers a lot. I mean, there's no question in my mind, independent studies notwithstanding, Sue, that the Courant leans left and the Waterbury Republican, without question, is over there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like if I turn on the radio. If I turn on TIC, sans what just happened, if I turn on TIC, right, versus NPR, which you're a guest, you're a guest there frequently, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question in my mind when I'm driving and listening to NPR, or I'm driving and listening to TIC, I'm listening to left versus right. Now, you're saying when you put everything together...
With qualitative studies, I promise.
Really?
I'm not making that up. Because I was surprised. I mean, again, I'm coming at it as the left-leaning, off-the-table,
Right.
communist, socialist, way over there columnist.
But you leave that, do you leave that objectivity out of the classroom?
Yeah, you have to.
You have
That's
to.
not right.
Okay.
And what I'll do when I'm teaching my classes, at some point I will say, these are my political beliefs. I do not want you to embrace them unless you come to them independently, but I want you to know that those are mine and everything.
You do that, like in full disclosure.
I do that as not as a let's all go over and be socialists, but it's more like let's understand that everybody comes at everything with a bias, and I want you to know, and if you hear anything and you say, call me on it. But I try very hard not to. I mean, that's not what the class is there for.
Well, I applaud that. I mean, to me, there are three different segments when it comes to journalism school. There's the professor who won't say a word about their leanings.
Sure.
There's someone like Susan who, in full disclosure, says, this is what I am, but it shouldn't be brought to the table.
Absolutely.
And then there's that character.
Yeah, that's not good. That's not what
There's
you're
that
there
character, whatever his name was, Crawford Churchill or something out in Colorado or wherever he was.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all off the
Yeah,
charts this way.
that's not right.
So I guess all that I'm saying is that net of the qualitative studies, Sue, the impression is, I think on the part of a lot of people, doesn't make it right or wrong, is that everything is not covered the same, it's not covered objectively, and like there is an agenda. So my question would be, because let me ask you directly the question. Do you think if that were Barack Obama,
That cup?
yeah, because it's filled with knowledge, of course.
Thank you. Your president.
Amen.
Who's that?
That's
Dick
George
Cheney.
Bush.
Oh,
No, not Dick Cheney.
Filled with
It's George.
air.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
I mean,
kidding.
Here we go. So Sue, your position is that journalists, reporters, columnists, and editorial writers treated both the same.
columnists haven't and
Columnists
never will.
have not.
Editorial writers will never. My hope is that reporters would be right here and look objectively both at my president and both at my former president with the same skeptical eye. Not be a cheerleader for either one and not try to drag anybody down that they didn't bring themselves.
Okay, you see, Sue, I happen to think what you just said is very instructive in the sense that, in the interest of full disclosure and educating people, what you just said is, don't look at an editorial board and expect them to say we have no biases.
No.
Don't look at a columnist and expect her to say I have no bias. What you can expect is you can't expect a journalism to be completely objective.
Yeah, and you can call them on it if you think they aren't.
I think one of the things that happens, Sue, I mean, we both know what happens, is without the definitions that you've just brought and the disclosure that you've just brought, people have a tendency to put all this together and saying they're all alike.
And see, that's print media's mistake in not making that crystal clear. That everybody has a role within a newspaper in particular. Magazines as well. They have people who shoot from the lip and they hate that guy or they hate that guy, and you're going to know what you're getting. It's an opinion. But we could do a better job saying no. And again, total disclosure, people need to contact their local media outlet if they feel like they've swayed one way or the other in their news coverage.
Right.
But how can you be an unbiased columnist? What are you going to say? I like puppies?
Well, you know what? I really think when you ask that question, it gets down to the semantics.
Yeah.
It's answered by, I'm not supposed to be.